I'm reminded of, there's a quote attributed to Ernest Hemingway. How did you go bankrupt? He says, 2 ways. Gradually, and then suddenly. So hold that thought in mind. This year has been the year of sudden changes. But actually, the gradual changes, the pressure, has been building up for a long time. The first point I wanted to leave with you is the role of the United States for the last 8 decades actually is historically unprecedented. The ultimate winner of the Second World War, 40% of global GDP, that was his share of global GDP, decided instead of conquering and eliminating the vanquished, rebuilt Germany, Europe through the Marshall Plan, Japan, and it set really a rules-based globalization with economic integration at the core. And this is highly, highly unusual and unprecedented. So that's the first point. It is about the US. Second point is that actually the pressures on the US to give up on this has been building up for a long time. And what do I mean? If you think about it, what the US did for 8 decades was to provide, first, the market, second, technology, third, capital, and rules-based economic integration. The first beneficiary of that, apart from Europe, was Japan. And then you had the Asian tigers, Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore, and then the rest of Southeast Asia. But the real winner of rules-based free trade has actually been China. And the US is only 249 years. It has never met a peer competitor with the scale, the ability, and the willingness to reorder the world in a way that's favorable to it. But the point is that China, if you look at its per capita GDP, it's still a middle-income country. And China is not able or willing to replace the US as the underwriter of globalization. So we are, to quote my Prime Minister in an interregnum, a state of messy transition from a world in which there was an underwriter and enforcer. And that underwriter and enforcer has now decided to become disruptor in chief for political reasons, for domestic political reasons, because after 8 decades of providing capital, technology, and markets, what the middle class in America has seen is deindustrialization, rust belts, hopelessness, and middle income stagnation. And guess what? Elections are local. So it is a completely legitimate question for the American voter to say, wait a minute, why should we underwrite in blood and treasure this system which seems to have profited the rest of the world, and especially a big peer competitor? And I think we need to pull back. So you see my point about gradually and then suddenly. So we just happen to be witnessing it's like an iceberg or an continental ice shelf falling. But actually the climate warming was predated that. So my point is, what we're witnessing today is not just a change of weather. It's not the storm that delayed Mike yesterday. This is real climate change, geopolitical climate change. So that's context setting. President Trump, as a person, in fact, has been uniquely consistent for decades. What do I mean? If you look at his record of what he said watch the interview with Oprah Winfrey back in 1988. His views on war, anti-war. His views on free trade, that it's an avenue for America to be taken advantage of. His views on business in a Main Street real estate way as opposed to Wall Street and financial engineering. His views on immigration actually have been remarkably consistent, and I think people don't give enough marks for that point. So he is consistent. It's just that his methodology, his presentation is somewhat novel, and people react to that. But my point is, American policy under President Trump, in fact, is reflecting long-held deep convictions. I think what we've witnessed so far is a tactical pause. The fundamental problem with the US and China is an almost complete lack of strategic trust. And that means each side has to assume the worst of each other. And even if you're taking precautions, it's viewed as escalatory. Both sides have identified pain points. And I think what you've seen so far is not a strategic realignment or a sudden dawn of strategic trust. Is that both sides have decided they need time, they need a tactical pause whilst you get on with the real business. And the point about decoupling is worth unpacking, because what we are witnessing in the world right now is a couple of phenomena. Number one, you have witnessed the weaponization of everything. Weaponization of the dollar, weaponization of finance, weaponization of critical minerals, global supply chains. Interdependency used to be a good thing. Now it's a vulnerability. But my point about weaponization of everything, Newton's third law applies in diplomacy too. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the weaponization of everything has led to an erosion of trust, has led to a need to assume the worst and to prepare for it. And in the absence of trust, it's very hard to actually have strategic alignment. So that's the first point. Right? What you're witnessing now is a tactical pause. The strategic problem remains. The next aspect of what's going on now is the fracturing of supply chains. And it's not an ideological point, but I think especially during COVID, you found that even simple things like making a mask, which is not rocket science, but the essential components were not within reach, and everyone was panicking and you didn't have access to it. So the fracturing of supply chains in the name of national security and in search of resilience actually means a world which hitherto has been based on efficiency is now building supply chains on a basis of nearshoring, onshoring, friendshoring. Economically, what that must mean is some inflation, because you're no longer choosing the cheapest and the best, most efficient. You're now having other considerations. So watch that bout of inflation. The third point is the global commons. You saw the opening video. And I've been involved in this game long enough, so I'll give you an example, the Paris Climate Change Agreement. The only reason that got done is because America and China were on the same side and were able to drag the rest of us, an imperfect but important agreement. Today, if the two main players are not in the same room, and it goes further than that. In fact, it's not just a matter of picking up your marbles and leaving the game, but you're actually disrupting the game. And my worry is that we're going to be unable to deal with the global commons. It means climate change, pandemics, the challenges from AI. We won't be able to respond adequately to it because the two key players either are disrupting actively or are spoiling for a fight and are certainly not willing to restrain themselves with multilateral rules imposed by Lilliputian countries, big and medium and small elsewhere. I hope that's not too depressing. I think without strategic trust, the logic for decoupling, at least partially, in the name of national security and anxiety over competitiveness will continue to play out. And that's what we're witnessing. But if I can come back to where you started with a piece of good news, you said, why hasn't the rest of the world retaliated? I think a couple of reasons. Number one, they're a far bigger elephant or eagle than the rest of us. So what's the point of retaliating when, in fact, the little guy will be the ultimate loser? So that's the first thing. Second, And I'm coming to your good news. If you leave aside the two big powers, and if you open a world atlas and draw a diagonal, Europe, the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. And then you draw two spokes, one to Northeast Asia, particularly Japan and Korea, and another spoke southwest to Africa and South America. Guess what? In fact, there is still a majority of countries, and even I would say the majority of global GDP, that still wants to operate on supply chain efficiencies, on economic integration, on rules-based globalization. The only thing is the enforcer in chief is no longer there. And there is a need, therefore, to assemble a coalition of the willing. So what you're watching now, all that scurrying around by medium and small economies, is to keep globalization alive, reform what needs to be reformed. And there's a lot that needs reform. But to work together in a more collegiate way, knowing full well that the underwriter, the enforcer, is not going to be doing the heavy lifting. So that's where I think there is a glimmer of hope. And that's why, my Prime Minister and I have been scurrying around to regional and international conferences. And the good news, I agree with you. The majority of people, in fact, want some order, some stability, and some benefits, economic benefits, from working together, from interoperating. And what we are hoping ultimately is that when things settle down between the two big boys, they will then rediscover the benefits of globalization. If you look at, in Singapore, we're members of both the CPTPP and RCEP, which are big, mega free trade deals. We're trying to convince the European Union, who is also a reflexly pro-trade, pro-rules
Are they going to join?
entity. No, I think that's a bridge too far. But can we get a partnership between the European Union and the CPTPP, especially the CPTPP, which is expanding?
You've got to think of a better name. We need a better
I know. In fact,
I think that's why no one talks about it, honestly.
I know. But if you strip aside the labels and the names, the point is there benefit from globalization, from efficiency, from interoperability, from standards, from peaceful resolution of disputes, including trade disputes? The answer is unequivocally yes. But we need to do it now, and everyone needs to chip in. So I think the EU is a natural partner with the CPTP. So think of the EU and the Pacific. Can we construct something that cuts a diagonal across the globe? And is Africa keen on this? I think they are. South America. You may be surprised, even little Singapore, we've signed free trade deals with Mercosur, which is Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay. We've even signed a free trade agreement with the Pacific Alliance, Mexico, Colombia, Chile. So the point is, you'll be surprised, the appetite for economic integration remains. And that's what Singapore is working. Now, of course, I'll tell you, of course we are biased. This is a place, this is Manhattan without upstate New York. Or this is 1/5 of Rhode Island without continental United States. Or if you want another uncomfortable analogy, Singapore is just twice the size of Gaza, but with 3 times the population. So we're a tiny place in which our trade volume is 3 times our GDP. So I hope you understand, when we promote free trade, it's lifeblood. It's not a negotiating point, right? And when we say rules are better than the alternative, because the alternative is right is might, big is beautiful, and small is irrelevant. So I will confess, this is a self-interested argument.
But you talked about the importance of rules, but also of countries working together.
Yes, absolutely.
Without the enforcer. Should the Southeast Asian economies, even the ASEAN countries, have worked together more in negotiating these trade deals with the US? You talked about
I don't
bilateral arm wrestling, you described it.
Yes. No, I don't think that was necessary. Certainly not at this stage. if you look at ASEAN as a whole, the tariffs range from 10%, 19%, maybe 20%. And those numbers keep changing anyway. My point is, don't overreact to the headline of the day. Understand what's going on. So if you now bring your zoom lens to ASEAN, have we systematically brought down our trade barriers, non-tariff barriers? Is ASEAN fulfilling its mission of becoming a single production zone, a single investment zone? Has there been economic growth in ASEAN? What are the prospects for ASEAN in the next 2 decades? We think we can double our combined GDP. If you add up the combined GDP of ASEAN, which, by the way, has a population slightly larger than the EU, we're about number 5. And because half our population is below the age of 35, and our middle class is growing, the prospects, the long-term prospects are bright, so long as we don't overreact, we don't do stuff that actually boomerangs back on us. And if you just look at what we did this year, we upgraded the ASEAN agreement on trade in goods within ASEAN. We upgraded the ASEAN-China free trade agreement. And we're still looking at building more bridges across the world. So my point is that, in fact, Southeast Asia is a zone of hope and growth. The key thing is to focus on the long term. And what does long term mean? It means technology, bearing in mind that we've got 3 technological revolutions going on in real time, simultaneously. AI, biotech, renewable energy. And we're focusing on building up the infrastructure for that. We're focusing on educating a workforce, work ready for that kind of world, the world of AI and robotics. And we're focusing on integrating. We can still increase our intra-ASEAN trade significantly. And what about ASEAN Africa, ASEAN South America? Some people call it South-South. I don't really like the term. But my point is there is still a majority in favor of this. I would also point out the CPTPP began as 4 tiny states: Singapore, Brunei, New Zealand, and Chile. And it only became TPP when America and Japan came in. Now, we knew by the time Hillary Clinton had to withdraw from her support from the TPP, which in fact she had a lot to do with starting, that the cause of free trade was in political problems. And I think all of us in this room, who I would say are probably instinctive free traders, need to realize that we didn't make the political case for it. And you have to convince your local electorate that jobs and wages and opportunity come from free trade. Otherwise, if you don't understand the political reality that for every free trade agreement there are winners and losers, you need to put seat belts on. You need to have compensatory mechanisms. And whilst you don't expect governments to choose winners and losers at the enterprise level, but governments do need to be activists. Infrastructure, education, pro-enterprise regulatory environments. You do need an active government. But what you don't want is completely state-directed capitalism, where you pick winners and losers. We think that's ultimately a dead end. So anyway, my point is, watch this space. Okay. That's why there's still buzz in this part of the world. Actually, the world has had unsustainable imbalances for some time. If you outsource all manufacturing to China, you outsource all energy to Russia, and you outsource security to America. I'm referring to the EU. Right? That's not a sustainable model. And if the EU wants to have strategic autonomy or independence, it needs to get a grip on manufacturing, on its industrial capacity, on its defense, and on its energy policies. I'm just giving you one example. Right? In the case of China, it's worth also reflecting, because China became the manufacturing center of the world and enjoyed economies of scale, and by the way, I must say, Chinese workers happen to be really hardworking and efficient. I don't think you can fault China for that. But a world in which all manufacturing is accumulating on one half, trade surpluses are accumulating there, but those trade surpluses are being recycled. It used to be recycled into T-bills. What it meant is, for a while, the Western consumer enjoyed low inflation, low interest rates, high-quality goods at affordable rates, but actually were consuming beyond what they were producing. And we should not be surprised that this system, based on imbalance, was not sustainable. Now, if you imagine that America shuts its market to the productive capacity of China, and the EU also follows suit, and think of automotives as an example, then the question will be, will China be able to expand its domestic consumption to match its capacity, or will it still try to export its way out? And if it does, where will it export to?
But that is what they've been.
Right? No, I think, but I'm saying without being pejorative or making value judgments, just ask yourself, do you need domestic changes to the economic structure of China? I think we do. What does Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America want? Do we need infrastructure? We do. Is the productive capacity of China for the development of that infrastructure, particularly green energy, AI, and even biotech, which, by the way, speaking as a doctor, the Chinese are no slouches in that area too. So what I'm saying is, watch this space. I am sure adjustments will occur, both domestically and across borders and across zones. And the opportunity will be to try to catch these waves, catch these new tides and winds, so that we maximize opportunities for the rest of us. So so I'll come back to the hopeful note in which you started. Not all of us have lost our heads and reacted in panic, or even acted on sense of retribution. But we've tried to take a longer-term view of the imbalances and of the trends, and to seek opportunities in these interactions.
Well, I think
that's the basis of arbitrage.
For 60 years, Singapore's been fairly good at that.
Yeah, but 60 years is, in Asia, 60 years is far too early to tell. So we never take our survival for granted.